Good communication at the end of the day, I think, just means that you make your listener do as little work as possible. If I had a limited number of words to use, how would I most effectively use those words to get to the same conclusion? We have this tendency to assume that other people have the same level of context as us, and in many situations, that's simply not the case. Maybe you have idea one followed by example one, and it's structured, everything is organized in a systematic way, and you go through it 1, 2, 3. Have you ever wondered why sometimes when you speak, it comes across sounding really disorganized or not how you wanted it to sound? Today, I'm going to explain to you how to think and articulate your thoughts in a systematic way. This is based on everything that I've learned over the last 4 to 5 years working at companies like Google, BCG, and Sullivan Partners. This is going to be a little bit more potentially theoretical of a video, but I think some of you will still find this really helpful if you are trying to improve your communication skills. Let's get into it. First things first, what is a system? The Google definition of a system is a set of things working together as parts of a mechanism or an interconnected network. Now, I know you're probably thinking, Matt, what the hell does this have to do with communication? Well, I want to give you an example right here. So let's say that you have an idea or multiple ideas and different examples that you want to convey, but in your mind, they're kind of floating around your head in different areas, and it's not really the most organized. And so if you were to go out there now and try to talk to someone and explain this idea in the most cohesive and coherent way possible, you probably would not be able to do so in the best way. And basically, this is what happens to a lot of people is they try to explain something, the ideas are a little bit jumbled, and then the other person kind of has to do a lot of the work of putting the building blocks together based on what you've told them. And it puts a lot of mental load, a lot of cognitive load on them to actually piece together what the hell it is you're even trying to convey. And so in the ideal scenario, what we actually want is we want your thoughts to be organized in a much more structured way, kind of like what I've set up here, where, for example, maybe you have idea one followed by example one, idea two followed by example two, idea three followed by example three, and it's structured, meaning that everything is organized in a systematic way, and you go through it 1, 2, 3 instead of jumping all over the place. Now, a couple things happen when you do this successfully. One, you yourself understand what it is you're talking about better, and two, the other person doesn't have to do as much work actually trying to figure out what the hell you're trying to say, because you take some cognitive load off of them because of how structured your delivery of the message was. Now, good communication at the end of the day, I think, just means that you make your listener do as little work as possible. Bad communication makes your listener have to struggle and really put in a lot of mental energy to figure out what it is you're saying, or to take the different ideas that you have and piece them together and come to their own conclusions, because you're not guiding them to the conclusion yourself. And so that's something that you should always keep in mind when thinking about, okay, how do we train ourselves to think and then articulate our ideas in a clear and a logical way that other people around us will understand? It comes down to just one thing here, which is structure. Structure is everything. And maybe I'm just saying this because I'm a former management consultant, and what we did on every single project was we would structure ambiguous business problems. So for example, client comes to us and says, I don't know what's going on in my business, but I know that profitability is declining. How the heck do I figure out what the problem is and then how we're going to solve it? And so the first thing we would do is they would drop in a team of consultants. We would build a framework, which is a set of key buckets that we wanted to investigate. And we would systematically go through each area, each bucket, until we got to the root cause. And then once we found the root cause of the problem, say, for example, maybe the reason why profitability was declining was because there was a particular business segment or a product that simply wasn't taking off nearly as much as they thought it would, and instead it was costing more to produce than to sell. So once we determined that problem, then we would be able to come up with a solution. And so at the end of the day, just remember, structure is everything when it comes to communication. And you want to try and organize your related ideas into buckets. Because I know some of you are thinking, okay, I know that structure is really important, but what does this even mean for me, right? The next time I want to explain something at work or to a friend or to my mom or my dad, how should I approach this, and how can I make sure that I'm communicating and articulating my thinking in a structured way? Well, the next time you have an idea that you want to explain to someone, say you want to explain something like, let's just take my example, how to think and articulate systematically. What I'm doing is I'm actually structuring this talk into 3 sections. So the first section we just covered, which is what is a system, kind of explained to you the overview of how I think about communication. The second, which we're on right now, is how do you actually train yourself to think and speak in a systematic way? And I'm telling you here that structuring your thoughts is super, super important. And then we're going to move to this third section later, which is like, how do you actually speak in a logical way once you have your thoughts in order, right? And you could do this with literally any topic. So it doesn't matter what you're trying to explain. I encourage you the next time you have something that you want to talk about with someone, just spend a little bit of time, maybe like a minute or 2, to sit down, grab a piece of paper or pull out your notes app and think about, okay, how can I explain this thing to this person in the most structured way possible? So maybe it's like, hey, this is why we should go to this Japanese restaurant instead of the one that you want to go to. Reason number 1, it's closer to both you and I. Reason number 2, the belly rating is higher for this restaurant than the other one. Reason number 3, they have, I don't know, more sushi options, and you love sushi, so we should go to the first restaurant. That's a very simple example of how you might want to communicate it in a systematic way. So you can do that with literally anything, and then that brings us to the next point though, which is once we've come up with our structure and once we know what we want to say, how should we be approaching the actual speaking and the actual delivery of the message? Well, what I've learned over the years working for a lot of very senior professionals, say like directors, VPs in big tech, my partners, managing directors in investment banking and in consulting, is that their time is extremely valuable. And so you should always, this is just a general best practice, but you should always think about the other person's time as being very valuable, even if they're not your boss. The reason why I think you should do this is because it's going to accomplish a few things. It's going to force you to think about what actually matters in the message that you're saying. And it's going to force you to think about, if I had a limited number of words to use, how would I most effectively use those words to get to the same conclusion? And so before speaking, you should ask yourself a series of questions. Number 1, why should they care? A lot of times we have this tendency to want to just blurt out whatever idea comes to our mind just because we think it's important. But great communication at its core is also empathy and understanding the other person and being able to put yourself in their shoes to really think to yourself, why would they care about the thing that I'm saying? Or how can I say this in a way or frame this idea in a way where they immediately will care about it? A great example of this is like if you're at work and there's some weird mistake that you found in this financial model that you're building. Instead of going to your boss and being like, hey, there's this financial model error in cell E132 in version 50 of the model, which is just going to make them kind of annoyed, what you should do instead is, hey, we've discovered that we may have overestimated the 5-year revenue projections, and so that's overinflating the value that we're assigning to this company. Say it's a discounted cash flow analysis, which is to help you value a company. Why your boss should care is because, okay, the valuation is too high. So if you deliver it up front with saying, okay, I think our valuation might be a little bit overinflated. I realize we made a mistake here and we picked too high of a growth projection for the DCF. That way they immediately know, okay, this is something that I should actually pay attention to and is actually worth my time. Second question you should ask yourself is, what do they know? We have this tendency to assume that other people have the same level of context as us, and in many situations, that's simply not the case. So if you ask yourself and just take 1 second to be like, what does this person know? What is their level of context on the problem that I'm about to talk to them about or about the topic that I want to present to them? That's going to allow you to tailor and adjust your language so that you can guide them along. And you're not, say, starting at this level of context when they only have this level of context, because then you're forcing them to close the gap, right? They're going to ask lots of questions because you didn't do a good job of tailoring the message so that it was for someone with their lower level of context. The second question, or the third question rather, which is tied to that, is what do I know? And so again, you've thought about, okay, this is where they are. What do I know? Okay, most times you're going to have higher level of context, higher level of understanding than this other person does about this topic, because maybe you're closest to the details, or you just have way more knowledge about the topic that you're trying to explain to them. And so in that case, again, you just want to bring down the level of context to the listener, because if you don't, you're basically forcing them to do more mental work to get to your level. Now, the last question then should be obvious by now, but it's, okay, how do I bridge the gap most effectively between their level of context and mine? And there's a few different ways that you can do this, right? Like I said earlier, they could do this by asking you questions. But what you could do is you could preemptively answer those questions. And so if you know, for example, that they don't know as much as you do about a topic, then you should go ahead and preemptively explain some of those things that you know they're going to end up asking. And this, again, requires you to just take a second and think about, okay, what do they probably want to know? Or what questions are probably going through their mind when I say this thing? Because I know that they have 50% level of understanding of whatever it is that I do. So how do I explain it to them preemptively? Also, maybe this means that you need to use analogies and things that they understand. So speaking their language or using analogies that they would understand to explain this complex topic to them. Now, some of you are probably picking up on a theme here, which is that the only way to effectively articulate your thoughts in a way that the other person will understand is to, one, accurately identify their level of context and understanding of the thing that you're about to explain to them. And then two, use the tools available to you and explain it to them, not in a way that makes sense to you, but in a way that makes sense to them. And so if you don't understand where they are in terms of their context, you need to ask and you need to find out, okay, like how much do you know about this topic that I'm about to tell you? Because then you're not going to just automatically assume that they know the same amount as you or that they know less than you. You should always ask and try to find out how much knowledge or context they have, and then you can tailor your message so that it lands effectively. But anyways, just to summarize, this is how you think and articulate in a systematic way. Step one is that you understand that communication is at its core fundamentally about coming up with a structure to your thoughts, because your thoughts are often going to be all over the place. They're going to be here and there. There's going to be some threads in between them, but generally they're not going to come immediately perfectly packaged how someone wants to hear them. And so structuring your thoughts in a systematic and logical way is going to be your friend. And if you can get in the habit of structuring everything and just thinking about different ideas that you have in broad bucket categories, then that's going to already allow you to communicate in a more structured way, because once your thoughts are structured, then you can actually speak logically and in a way that doesn't require someone, a listener, to think that hard about what it is you're saying. Now, I'm not saying they're not going to think hard about the topic that you're talking about, but you don't want to force them to do more work than is absolutely necessary to understand your message. And so before speaking, you got to ask yourself a few questions. Why should they care? What do they know? How much do I know? And then what do I need to do to actually bridge that gap? And if you can effectively answer all those questions and execute on the last one, then your communication and your ability to articulate a complex or simple idea to someone else is just going to be so much more effective.